Thank you, and I'm glad to be here. It just occurred to me that it feels like a world away from Manhattan, and I had a very pleasant journey coming here. But as Kate just mentioned, I am a PhD student at Columbia, and I am also a former foreign correspondent based mostly in East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And I know that you have looked into how media gets received by people, how different forms of global media exist in the world, and also a little bit into the funding side, if I understand correctly, how the sort of economy behind global news works. But today I wanted to really look more into the production side. So as we say, how the sausage gets made in the world of global journalism. And there are a lot of problems, as you can well imagine. Starting with the fact that foreign correspondents are disappearing. There just are not many of them left. These are a couple of headlines that I scraped that basically captures what's been happening in the world of news. So long story short, foreign bureaus have been disappearing at a great rate. And you can all imagine why that would be. Why would foreign bureaus, disappear overnight? Why did Boston Globe, which is a major newspaper, if you're from the New England region, shut down all of its foreign bureaus in 2007? Can anybody take a guess?
This should be fresh in your mind, guys.
Yes. Yes, please.
I think because with the usage of social media, it's not necessary that people on the ground.
Yes.
Might
Yes, you're about 3 steps ahead, by the way, but that's a great answer. Yes?
Because there are more news-making tools everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Newspapers don't depend on foreign correspondents because there will now be journalists in those countries.
That was.
They can get them to write for them.
I don't have to give this lecture because you seem to have all the answers. Nicely done, Kate. But I want. So you guys are basically giving me all these advanced answers. But yes, please. Exactly. That's the sort of the answer I had expected. But you're clearly much more educated than that. Yes, it is very expensive to do foreign correspondence. If you think about the costs of not only sending someone in all the way to foreign locations, but also you have to think about the translators, getting them housing, and insurance if it's a dangerous location, and education if they don't speak the language. So long story short, it was an expensive area to begin with. And when you think about the economy of news, you always also have to think about the revenue that foreign news brings in. And it actually turns out that people don't read foreign news that much. So that's some of the considerations that was going in when they were shutting down foreign correspondents. But I must preface by saying that I wasn't entirely comfortable with the way people were talking about the whole situation, because I was not an American reporter who was working for CNN or one of the big news outlets. And I saw how they worked, and oftentimes I was like, well, CNN, they have a lot of staff, and they're doing great stuff, but I'm not so sure if we should simply bemoan the fact that these bureaus have shut down. And so that was where I started thinking, and we still see foreign reporting all the time. There's no shortage of news, it seems. So I got a little curious, and I wanted to find out how things were actually being done. So this is, okay, my laptop has decided to freeze. I don't know if it's a screen thing. Can you? Okay. Oh, it's working now. Thank you. So that's basically, it's a photo somebody took in the office of Philadelphia Inquirer, and some guys started to cross out names of colleagues who have left. So this is basically the situation that I start with. And the questions that I want us to think together today is, how can foreign news get produced and distributed and be sustainable when very few people can afford to be on the ground? And that's a big question, a big problem when you think about it. Nobody's there, nobody's out there. Somebody take a guess. How many American newspaper foreign correspondents do you think would be based right now outside the US? Any numbers? Take a guess.
Like news organizations?
No. The number of foreign correspondents who write for American newspapers. All of them. All of the newspapers in America.
We actually had a chart with this last week.
100. 100?
That's basically sort of the number that people have in mind. Yeah.
Wow.
We're talking about a number that's probably in 2 digits, because the last time somebody did the head count, there are gray areas. Like, how do you count someone who's a part-time correspondent, right? How do you count someone who's a local, like a freelancer who writes a lot for the LA Times? But by most measures, we are looking at a number that's around 100, if not less, right now. Of course, that doesn't take into consideration the vast majority of foreign correspondents who work for the news agencies, and that's a different world. Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, they still have a healthy number of people who are based abroad. But when it comes to everyone else, including not only the newspapers, but also broadcasting stations, CNN, which actually built its brand around being the international news station, has cut back a lot on foreign coverage. And CNN has, I don't know if you guys realize this, but CNN has different editions. So the CNN that you watch in Asia is different from the CNN you watch in New York or in LA. But the American edition of CNN basically has the percentage of foreign news has basically been cut in half since the last decade. So it's pretty drastic. And so nobody's on the ground. Of course, technology is the game changer, right? And that's another. So what role does technology have in all of this? And by technology, I don't just mean new technology, right? I also mean old technology. What about technology that some people are using in other parts of the world? And the issue of financial sustainability that we will talk over and over in this class. Just to get you guys start thinking about different ways that foreign correspondence is being done. When we say foreign correspondence, I think there are a couple of faces that we can all think of. Who's a typical foreign correspondent? Anderson, yes, thank you. Diane Sawyer, she did some international stuff, but I think I primarily think of her as just an American. Who? Amanpour, yes, she's pretty she's quite famous. I think she's a chief international correspondent, is her official. So yeah, she's also she's very distinctive, right? With her accent and everything. Yes, who else can we think of among the newspaper correspondents? Anybody we can think of? Well, a lot of people usually say Nick Kristof, right? Although he does more of that B is sort of.
It's like flying.
Okay, I'll try to chase it.
It's a B.
Yes, I actually saw that. So, but most of the foreign correspondents that we know actually, and this is a scholar who has come up with sort of a typology of his own when it comes to foreign correspondents. The foreign correspondents in our imagination are people who are usually sent from home. In other words, they're English-speaking Americans, if it's an American news outlet, and usually, it used to be usually guys, although that has changed a lot, but who are sent abroad to find out what story there is and report it back for the home audience. But according to Hamilton, he says that's just one type of foreign correspondence among 7. So that's traditional foreign. But the second category, foreign, is just as important. And what he means by that is, if you actually look at how news is actually being made in foreign locations, oftentimes much of it actually gets made by the stringers and the local translators, or what the people we call fixers. These people not only fix things, but they actually arrange people to meet. They tell the reporter about the local dynamics. Sometimes in my research, I actually once heard an office manager I think it was in Jordan. She said, "Oh, I'm the one who decided which story gets made, because if there's a new foreign correspondent who comes in, I sit down with him," because it was usually he. "And I tell him, these are the important issues that you have to cover, and here are the different political parties and the factions, and I'll take you to that guy next morning, and that's the first story you're going to write." And this was an office manager at the Associated Press office who had worked in her job for many years, who was basically telling the reporter what to write about. So that's kind of, underlines the importance of the local staff, especially when the situation is complicated in many countries, and the reporter doesn't really have a good grasp of the local culture, language, history. Local foreign is something that's totally different. Local foreign would be like the reporter who writes about the car industry for the New York Times, and who could be based in New York, who might be based in Detroit. But because the automobile industry has global significance, he or she would be in regular contact with automakers in Japan and Germany. And the story has an international significance. So although that reporter would be local, in essence, he is doing international reporting. And that's what Hamilton meant by local foreign. Parachute foreign is really the situation where you parachute in. That's something that's done often by TV personalities as opposed to reporters, right? Anthony Bourdain recently went to Iran, and I think that's a typical example of parachuting into a country and doing, it has more of that like celebrity context, but also with natural disasters. A lot of reporters who aren't usually based there, they parachute into the places. Premium service foreign is a little bit different. You write for a very niche audience who are willing to pay. It's really for the global finance market or the natural resources like the mining industry market. By the way, if you know a lot about the mining industry or the natural resources, so if you have some sort of like scientific knowledge, and if you're also a good writer, turns out that there's a very good market for writers, because Bloomberg really wants those people to do international reporting. In-house foreign is not reporting in the traditional sense. This is a growing area where Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch would hire someone and to do the kind of like journalistic work that journalists used to do. But because so many newspapers and news outlets have cut back on their foreign correspondence, they're doing it in-house. And it resembles serious journalism. So much of what we know about the atrocities happening in Syria, for example, actually are first reported by the likes of these in-house foreign reporters, by Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and so on. And citizen foreign is something I don't have to explain to you guys, right? Citizen journalism. So basically, just about any teenager or somebody with a cell phone, any part of the world, uploads something, and that's when she becomes a journalist. Foreign local is something that you would see a lot in major cities in the US. And that is when somebody, let's say in Riverdale, is reporting about what's happening in Israel for the Orthodox community. So it's sort of the inverse situation where the foreign news is meant for a specific population. But basically, the takeaway from this slide is that foreign correspondents come in different shapes and sizes and colors. And for us to just simplify it and saying, oh, foreign correspondents are disappearing, doesn't exactly capture the situation. So today I want to focus on a specific subset of these foreign correspondents, which I'm calling virtual foreign bureaus. And these actually can be any of the 7 that I've mentioned, or maybe at least 4 or 5 over there. But by virtual foreign bureaus, I mean single subject foreign news outlets, so small news outlets or startups or even a single freelancer who decides to cover a very hard to cover country where it's very dangerous, very expensive, or it's simply like logistically impossible to get in. So there are a couple of countries that you can imagine where that would be the case, starting with North Korea, thank you. Syria, for example. Iran is actually tricky, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But so these are places where mainstream journalists just cannot get in for a number of reasons, or the price they have to pay is too high, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I focus on 2 cases and 2 small news outlets that are virtual foreign bureaus that are not based in the countries that they cover, but actually are based in London or New York or outside. And these 2 news organizations are primarily based in London, although they really don't have that physical core. NK News, it was founded in 2010 by a British researcher, and it has a dozen staffers who work from London, Seoul, DC, New York, Australia, and Hong Kong. Tehran Bureau is founded by an alum of Columbia Journalism School, and she's an Iranian American. So the North Korea beat. This is the beat that I used to work in. It's, as you probably know, it's one of the least accessible, most, it's sort of an unknown, I think, in many ways. And foreign media is rarely granted access. I was extremely lucky to have been one of the very few journalists who were allowed in the early 2000s when, you might recall, there was a sort of a rapprochement situation in North Korea when they were trying to open up their country a little and try to see if reform might stick. Didn't really work out, but I was allowed in as a result. But even when I was in North Korea, it's not like I got to just walk around freely and ask people questions, because there was always a minder here and there, and I would have to negotiate where I wanted to go, and the walls had ears. I mean, I knew that there was a lot of surveillance and going on. There wasn't censorship, though. When they were not happy with our story, when the North Koreans were not happy with the story that the foreign reporters are filing, they just simply cut off the phone line, and that was it. So that was, yes, it was censorship, but it was either the story goes in or not, and and sometimes we couldn't even tell if the phone lines were cut off on purpose, and we didn't have internet, by the way, because North Korea's power shortage is so chronic, so they sometimes would have genuine blackouts. But right now, the Associated Press and the news agencies of Russia, which is Novosti, China, and Japan do have offices in North Korea. But as you can imagine, they basically work under similar conditions that I used to work as a journalist in 2000, which is their hands are tied. They can't get out of Pyongyang, and they're followed everywhere. So of course you can't just approach anyone and ask questions, because what if she gets taken to the police station as a result. So so they usually stick to the official statements, or something that's really not at all sensitive, basically, like the weather in Pyongyang or that kind of thing. And the more political, socially sensitive stuff gets written from outside North Korea. So you would start to wonder, why do they have offices in North Korea if they can't get any meaningful journalistic work done? Why would they have offices? If you're the manager of AP, why would they have an office there? Can anyone take a guess?
It's better than not having an office.
It's better than nothing.
Maybe one day.
Yes, that one day is really important, because come on, like journalists like live and die for scoops, right? You don't want to miss out. Like God forbid if there's a major accident, revolution, the fall of the Berlin Wall, another 9/11, let's hope that won't happen, but something of that magnitude, journalists just thrive on that sort of physical presence. And of course, like everybody outside North Korea is wondering, like, will it ever collapse? Will there ever be a people's revolution in North Korea? That kind of thing. So it's like more like an insurance, I think, for the future. And that's a great point. But there's also the problem. Because people who are based there can't really do serious journalism, you end up relying a lot on official sources of other countries who don't always agree with North Korea. So I used to talk all the time to the South Korean officials who would have their own take on things, right? And the Japanese officials have their things. I mean, Washington is really important in shaping how North Korea gets reported. But that's one thing. But there's another issue there. So you can't really learn a lot from like officials about like what's really happening culturally. Like they wouldn't tell you about what's happened. They can't tell you about how people feel about certain issues or whether how the market economy works in North Korea these days, because there's a small growing market economy there right now. And as foreigners who consume North Korea related news, there's a lot of bad coverage out there as a result, because there's no way to get good sources. It's very hard to find leads, and it's next to impossible to verify anything about North Korea. So instead what you have is the likes of this story, which got prominent coverage last year. Kim Jong-un, the ruler of North Korea, executed uncle. That's actually true. Was eaten alive by 120 hungry dogs. Turns out that there was a rumor blog that was Chinese that started the rumor. It was more like a satire, actually. And but because everybody thinks, of course, these North Koreans are crazy. They're capable of doing anything. So it sort of like started this global cycle of like it got quoted by NBC, which got quoted by AP. It sort of started the whole cycle and ended up, at the website of NBC. Now, whenever you see something like this, you should become really suspicious. Look at that, like report part. That means they don't really know. It means they have not done their homework, but at the same time, they don't want to miss out. Hence that like sneaky thing. And I went back to the website and they haven't issued correction. It's because it's not like North Korea can like protest. It's not like they'll call NBC and try to get the story out. So that's the North Korea situation. How about Iran? Iran is different because Iran is more open. I mean, it's compared to North Korea, that is. But there are other issues there. There are more foreign journalists who are based in Tehran, and it is it is much easier for people to go in and out of Iran. And the New York Times or the Washington Post has staffers there. AP has stringers there. But here, there are different problems. The vast majority of reporters who cover Iran are people who are of Iranian descent. Meaning, and Iran, by the way, does not recognize dual citizenship. So the way it works is, even if you're just one of your parents are Iranian at the time of birth, you assume Iranian citizenship, whether you like it or not, and you can't denounce it. So that means, although you may have dual American-Iranian citizenship, the moment you set foot in Tehran, you are Iranian in the eyes of authorities, which becomes really tricky because they can accuse you of espionage if they wanted to, saying you are doing work for another government, for example. And this is exactly what happened with Jason Rezaian, who's a staff reporter at the Washington Post in Tehran, and he's been behind bars since 2014. And this is actually a complicated case because the Iranian government is not the single entity. The Iranian government, there are different factions, but it's sort of the hardliners who assume control of the judiciary, wanting to flex muscles, and to the administration, which is sort of more reformist, relatively speaking. So there are other issues, and it's become very much of a politicized affair. But at the end of the day, even New York Times reporters, even AP reporters have a hard time reporting on sensitive stuff in Iran. They can do it if they want that to be their last story before they get booted out. Unless you are like Jason of Iranian descent, in which case you have to languish in the notorious Evin prison, which is, I think, he's like lost half his weight right now. So people are really concerned about him. But actually being a foreigner can make it safer for you. So yeah, that's what I learned when I was working in sub-Saharan Africa, because I was so obviously a foreigner, and I hate to say it, but I think it afforded me some degree of protection, because people didn't know what to do with me, basically, although it wouldn't have protected me from outright violence. So before we look into how the sausage actually gets made, let's think about the price of the sausage. The cost of physical bureaus. It costs at least $3 to $4 million per year to run a news bureau in many places. That's not only the salary, but also setting up an office. And usually a single foreign bureau means there are at least like 2, 3, 4 people as support staff who are working for the news organizations. Yes?
Now the bureau, that's $3 to $4 million per
country,
location, right?
per location. Okay. Yeah. So yes, you have to multiply that by like 10 places if that news outlet has 10 news bureaus abroad. And there's the fear of physical harm, which you've just seen, like arrest and kidnapping. But actually, a bigger fear is the fear of getting kicked out, because it kind of and that's what would happen to you if you were to work as a freelancer or a reporter in a foreign country, because chances are you'll be a foreigner there. But but it's really like this mechanism where you kind of end up self-censoring yourself, because of course you've invested a lot of money and effort and time to get there. But what if like they basically decide to kick you out after 1 month because you've been writing all these like really sensitive stories on the political system? Right, so that's the sort of the fear that they have, which ends up becoming, quite like part of the price tag. And there's increasingly more concern about digital surveillance and censorship too. And I'm not just talking about Iran and North Korea here, because as we all know from the likes of Snowden, this is also happening here, right? That the government is increasingly willing to look into people's private communication and people's cell phone data and the likes well, they have a reason, they say, for like national security. But we all know that there are some problems and at the very least controversies. So yeah, so that's what we mean. That's Marie Colvin, who died while covering Syria, and she actually lost an eye covering northern Sri Lanka, where I'd also worked as a reporter. And there's James Foley, who was beheaded by ISIS while covering Syria as well. I included this picture there because that's sort of the, that's from the 1940s, and that was one of the BBC journalists, I believe. But to me, it's sort of it's the prototype like foreign correspondent who's like living a good life as that expat, because that's what it was seen as in the old days, as sort of, it was like your reward for working hard at home, meaning it wasn't so much about the story that you had to cover abroad, but it was an opportunity for that correspondent to get out and get some fresh air. So that's sort of the price that we have to think about when we think about foreign correspondence. So how does that translate into journalistic production? Now, we've all seen that the old ways of doing isn't exactly possible because of all the budget cutbacks and all the prices. But we also have to think about the ways to find sources and be able to basically do journalism without being there. Because as I said, it's very hard to get into North Korea. It's very hard to get into Iran. So how do you find your sources if you're in London and you want to report about Iran? Well, you have to find human sources, of course, right? Who can tell you about what's happening in Iran from North Korea? Turns out there are quite a lot. There are the diplomats who are based in North Korea who can talk to you about what's happening. If there are a lot of Iranian business people who are regularly flying to Iran, and that's a major source of information for Tehran Bureau. And also there are a lot of communities who are constantly in touch with the people. Almost everyone in Iran is on Facebook, according to my friend. And North Korea, they don't have Facebook so much, but they have. But a lot of people do talk on the phone with their relatives, and they're visiting professionals. So that's sort of the human sources that these virtual foreign bureaus rely much on. But there are the data sources that I wanted to draw your attention to, because this is basically what will enable you guys to do that kind of journalism if you ever decided to become a foreign correspondent after you graduate. Because you can't, I seriously discourage you from going to Syria. You may be, dying with this desire to start working as this correspondent working in war zones and conflict zones, but it's become way too dangerous. And also, there are other considerations. The price you pay is just way too high, and there are a lot of data sources that enable you to do the kind of journalism that's different from foreign correspondence in the past, but that's just as important, cool, meaningful, cheap, and fun, actually. So, have you guys taken any data journalism courses, or is that something that is on your radar? Yes, I saw a hand up there. What course did you take?
It's called social media.
Mm-hmm.
And we downloaded a lot of apps like that.
Mm-hmm. And did you sort of try to make use of it, by focusing on a topic? What were the topical focus that you guys looked into?
Well, when we downloaded Flickr,
Mm-hmm.
well, it was basically just representing yourself on each app that we downloaded.
Mm-hmm.
So we uploaded pictures of ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
filled in our information and just became available to the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even on Flickr, there's so many data points. You would be astounded if you were to go to the places in Flickr on Twitter where you can see the geotags, the location information. People actually tweet a lot from North Korea, it turns out. Who'd have known, right? But there are a lot of tourists who tweet from North Korea all the time. And these are, and mainstream journalists, usually, aren't as, technically savvy, or they just don't know how to do it. But turns out that there's a treasure trove of information that you could retrieve from not only that kind of a Flickr or YouTube or the proprietary social media, but also on government websites and publications. And if you're interested in doing journalism about global trade or global economy, it turns out that the world of maritime traffic, basically the shipping routes of all the big vessels in the world, is public information. And one journalist I know has made a career out of it. What he did was basically go to the website, which is free, that tracks all the shipping information of big ships. And he realized that there were a lot of ships from Mongolia, which is a landlocked country, by the way. So any ship that is carrying the Mongolian flag, the Mongolian government apparently makes a business out of selling the nationality to ships, right? So, but you can imagine, right? Ships with a Mongolian flag tend to carry suspicious goods, and they would go to weird places like North Korea, and that person also, and all the ships also have to be registered to a business address, turns out. And the ship with the Mongolian flag had a business address in Hong Kong. Well, you have Google Street View for that. That building was a street market. So again, right? There are a lot of investigative work that's only a click away. But that kind of information, and I have a feeling that you're kind of really savvy with the web search, as many of your generation are. And I'm actually going to show you a case of what's I think a global scoop actually, that relied mostly on data sources that you guys could all work with, basically. So the info.